Watching Fox and Friends First on this Monday morning. I'm Carly Shimkus in for Jillian Neely.
And I'm Rob Schmidt. Thanks for getting up early with us today. And a live look now at Capitol Hill this morning, where the country begins to say its final goodbyes to our 41st president. The casket of George H.W. Bush will make its way on Air Force One to Washington, D.C. to lie in the state rotunda. And his beloved service dog, Sully, accompanying Bush 41 for the last time. Casey Stiegel is live in Houston with how the late president will be honored this week. Good morning, Casey.
Carly, Rob, good morning to you. Yeah, you know, this plan really has been in the works for years, and now it is just being executed, and it really is a well-oiled machine. Later this morning, the family will be gathering at the funeral home here in Houston behind me, where they will then motorcade to nearby Ellington Field, and that is where Air Force One is waiting. We want to show you a picture of that now. Typically, it's called Air Force One when the president is on board. Today, it'll technically be called Special Air Mission 41. Once arriving at Joint Base Andrews around 3:30 Eastern Time, the former president will be taken to the U.S. Capitol building, where he will lie in state ahead of Wednesday's big state funeral at National Cathedral.
I feel really good about people if they analyze not only his accomplishments, but his character. They'll say, job well done, George H.W. Bush.
And of course, everyone just cannot stop talking about this picture. Get your tissue. Sully, the president's service dog, a little bit about him. He's a yellow lab seen here at the funeral home, keeping watch over the casket. We've learned that Sully H.W. Bush, his full name, by the way, will also be traveling with the family. He's family, of course, to D.C. The president wanted him to go back into service to help another military family, and we understand that is going to happen and that he could potentially be put to work at Walter Reed Medical Center. So Sully will continue to help others as he has President Bush here in his final moments. So that is the latest here from Houston. A very big day, lots of stuff scheduled. We're going to stay on top of it and have all of it for you here on Fox News, guys.
Absolutely.
That's a beautiful picture. All right, Casey, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
That is.
President Trump is considering pushing back the looming government shutdown in the wake of President George H.W. Bush's death. He is willing to sign a 2-week federal budget extension to give Congress more time to hammer out a spending bill. Republicans are fighting for $5 billion to fund the southern border wall.
And speaking of that, meanwhile, Mexican officials are in Washington this morning to work out a solution to the migrant crisis at the border.
Yeah, this as Mexican authorities are opening a new shelter in Tijuana with thousands of people living in very unsanitary conditions. And that's where we find Griff Jenkins, who continues our coverage there from the border with the very latest this morning. Hey, Griff.
Rob and Carly, good morning. Yeah, we're about 10 miles south of the border, and we are in the new shelter. Take a look at this video we shot yesterday. You'll see that there's more space there. It's a better conditions. They've got a concrete floor, and they're getting fed there. But here's the thing. Only about 3,000 of the total 6,000 are in here, meaning 3,000 may be unaccounted for. They had to leave, of course, the old shelter because of the unsanitary conditions, because of the mud. And this, of course, does not alleviate the fact that they had widespread respiratory infections and lice infestations amongst its populations. Meanwhile, Mexico did inaugurate a new president, AMLO as he's known, and he sent his foreign minister, Marcelo Ebrard, to meet with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to, quote, discuss shared commitment to address our common challenges and opportunities, according to State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert. Congressman Bob Goodlatte taken to the airways yesterday on Fox, saying it's time for a deal. Listen.
We need an agreement with Mexico, and we need our laws changed. This is not a situation that's any better for Mexico than it is for the United States. So they ought to work together to work it out.
One big concern is that whether or not this migrant group will try and rush that border again like we saw a week ago Sunday. But the organizer with Pueblos Sin Fronteras that's behind me in this shelter said he's not worried about that right now. They learned a lesson. Take a listen.
These people already learned. They already learned their lesson. See, they know, now they know that they can't just get into the United States, forcing the gates open because it's not gonna happen. They got to do it legally.
Now we wait to find out whether or not there will be anything that comes of the meetings between the new Mexican administration and the Trump administration. The agreement that we hope to get, that the administration wants to get, is that these migrants will continue to stay here in Mexico while they play out their asylum. Guys.
Yeah. That's right. We'll be talking a little bit about that deal later on, analyzing what the implications there are and if it could happen and all that. Thank you so much, Griff. We appreciate it. All right. Meanwhile, President Trump isn't backing down on his border wall despite continued pushback from the left.
According to Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce, Congress was able to scrape together $150 billion to seal the Iran deal. So why can't they find a fraction of that for border security?
And what you also wouldn't have is the chaos that keeps everyone distracted and is not looking at maybe other specific things that Congress is doing, allows for partisan arguments on both sides to keep people divided. It almost serves as the perfect distraction to keep Americans from noticing the nature of the condition of Congress. Here's one thing I know. Somehow, Barack Obama found $150 billion to give to Iran. Right. We don't know if there was a printer or if it came from, some hologram machine. They found $150 billion to give to a terrorist sponsoring nation, as our State Department recognizes it. But they can't quite find $5 billion for the wall.
Well, the border wall is also causing a rift among Democrats, with some in the House accusing Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of softening to the president's calls for funding.
Surprising thing there. All right, overnight, President Trump signaling progress with China following the G20 summit. The president tweeting, quote, China has agreed to reduce and remove tariffs on cars coming into China from the U.S. Currently, the tariff is 40%. Now, over the weekend, the U.S. and China agreed to a truce in their tit-for-tat trade war. President Trump said he would not impose new tariffs or raise current ones on January 1st, as he previously suggested. The news is expected to boost stocks today. Dow futures already surging well over 450 points overnight.
Well, a very special start to Hanukkah this year at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. Hundreds gathered for a special menorah lighting last night to mark the holiday and also to honor the 11 victims killed in that deadly October attack. President Trump again condemning anti-Semitism, writing in part, quote, Jews today continue to face many different forms of violence, hatred, and bigotry around the globe. As one nation, we pledge our continued love and support for the victims, their families, and the community, and we pray that the victims' families find some measure of peace and comfort during the holiday season.
And December tornadoes tearing through a naval submarine base in Georgia, despite the path of destruction at the Kings Bay base. Luckily, no serious injuries have been reported.
Yeah, some wild weather going on. The Midwest cleaning up after more than a dozen very late season twisters touched down in several states over the weekend. One person was killed in Missouri. Senior meteorologist Janice Dean is tracking the latest. It's weird to talk about this during Christmas time.
Yeah, I mean, it can happen. We can have tornadoes any month of the year, but we certainly had an outbreak because we had this powerful cold front sweeping across the eastern half of the country. And you can see the current temperatures, and it's 54 here in New York. Ahead of that front, it's warm. I mean, relatively speaking, across the East Coast. We're almost done with this storm system. But yes, we saw dozens of reports of tornadoes as well as strong winds. We saw reports of hail and a lot of snow, almost a blizzard across portions of the Midwest and the northern plains and the Great Lakes. So right now, we're almost done with this system. We're going to see some nuisance snow, some nuisance rain with this, and then that cold front sweeps through the East Coast, and we will start to see those temperatures drop. But ahead of it, I mean, we're going to be in the 50s and 60s along the coast. There's your future radar. So we will see some lake effect snow out of this system. And then our next big on the move storm will originate from the west over the next couple of days, bringing more heavy rain and more heavy snow for the California area. Here are your highs today. We're going to start to moderate those temperatures, especially across the northern plains. Still quite warm across the south, relatively speaking, but it'll be a much quieter day after a very busy weekend of severe weather.
I'll take 54.
Yeah, it'll just
pretty high.
for a day or two.
Yeah.
And then we're back to
and
30s.
a lot of moisture out west, the mountains.
Oh,
and,
absolutely.
And California getting dumped on. Yeah.
They need the rain, obviously, but too much of it can lead to flooding, flash flooding.
Janice, thank you so much.
Janice. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. All right, let's talk about Mars. Shortly after landing safely on Mars, NASA's InSight rover is already setting records. The space agency says the rover has generated more power during its first full day on the red planet than anything else before.
Wow. InSight is photographing Mars. Will eventually dig into the planet's core to study the interior of the planet. The mission is expected to last nearly 2 years.
Look at that. Would you go to Mars?
Depends how fast they can get me there. I think it takes about 8 months right now.
Depends on what ladies are knocking on your door, right?
It's a long road trip, yeah.
All right, the time now is 11 minutes after the hour. In the hot seat, ousted FBI Director James Comey agreeing to testify privately on Capitol Hill this week. But there's a catch. The deal he just reached with House Republicans.
And meeting with Mexico, the country's new government set to sit down with U.S. officials today. So can the two sides reach an agreement on the border with what's happening in Tijuana? Our next guest says it's a good sign that they are willing to take action. We'll see. James Comey agreed to testify behind closed doors about his involvement in the probe.
Rich Edson joins us live from Washington, D.C. with more as top Democrats cry obstruction of justice. Good morning, Rich.
Now, good morning, Carly and Rob. Former FBI Director James Comey is returning to Capitol Hill this week. He says he's agreed to testify before the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees about his handling of the FBI's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's email server.
If I were a Democrat, I'd be concerned about some of the actions taken by Mr. Comey and others in the FBI leading right up to the election, announcing a reopening of the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email, and then announcing again immediately after that it was being shut down.
Republicans subpoenaed Comey to testify in a closed session. Comey had asked a judge to allow him to testify in public. Now he's tweeted, quote, "Grateful for a fair hearing from judge. Hard to protect my rights without being in contempt, which I don't believe in. So we'll sit in the dark. But Republicans agree I'm free to talk when done and transcript released in 24 hours. This is the closest I can get to public testimony." Also on Capitol Hill, the incoming chairman of the House Intelligence Committee is responding to President Trump's comments to the New York Post that he would not take a pardon off the table for his former campaign chairman.
The president continues to dangle a pardon for Paul Manafort, which only adds to the growing body of evidence that the president is engaged in obstructing justice. That, I think, is the ultimate significance here.
Last week, the special counsel's office claimed Manafort violated their plea agreement, repeatedly lying to investigators. Also today, Jerome Corsi, an associate of Trump campaign advisor Roger Stone, now says his attorneys will file a complaint against special counsel Robert Mueller alleging criminal conduct. Last week, he claimed he rejected a plea deal from the special counsel's office. Back to you.
Thanks for getting up early, Rich.
Yeah, thank you.
We appreciate it.
All right, the time now is 17 minutes after the hour. The gridlock in Washington could put defense spending on the chopping block, but Defense Secretary James Mattis has this message.
When we measure defense spending, we must realize it's near historic lows. We all know here today that America can afford survival.
Don Bramer is an Iraq veteran who says cutting defense would be a disservice to the troops and the Americans they serve. He's going to talk about that.
A Fox Business alert here. The CEO of General Motors meeting with lawmakers this week after the company announced plans to cut 15,000 jobs and close 5 North American plants.
A lot of people not happy with GM. Tracy Carrasco from our sister network Fox Business has more on this big upcoming meeting. Hey, Tracy.
Good morning. Yes, GM CEO Mary Barra going to have to answer to lawmakers on both sides of the aisle who both parties have not been happy about this. President Trump especially not happy. He has expressed his disappointment. He's even threatened to cut some of those government subsidies. But she is going to have to answer some tough questions about why GM has decided to cut some 15,000 jobs. That's about 15% of its workforce. Also closing down those plants in Ohio, Michigan, Maryland, also shutting down the production of several vehicles. So we are unsure exactly when that meeting is set to take place, just sometime this week.
All right, well, speaking about losing jobs, we always talk about the robot takeover, and Amazon is now testing cashierless technology at some of their larger stores?
Yes. So Amazon, they rolled out these Amazon Go stores earlier this year. You can basically go in. You don't have to. You just scan what you want with an app, and then you kind of pick everything. You walk out of the store. There's no cashier. Well, they are trying this out in bigger grocery stores. Of course, there are some problems implementing this type of technology in bigger spaces with more products, but this could be an even bigger disruption to some of those other traditional grocery stores, other retailers. Once again, Amazon coming in and making changes how we shop. So they previously said they weren't going to use this with their Whole Foods stores, but we'll have to see if they change their mind.
All right.
In the future, nobody has a job. It's just Jeff Bezos and a billion robots running the world.
Yeah.
That's it. Tracy, thanks.
Sounds terrifying.
It's coming. Gridlock in Washington may put defense spending on the chopping block. Defense Secretary James Mattis is now warning that it would also put America at risk.
When we measure defense spending, we must realize it's near historic lows. We all know here today that America can afford survival.
All right, here now to break down what happens when the military's resources are cut is Iraq war veteran and former intel officer Don Bramer. Don, thank you so much for being with us this morning. So the military defense spending budget was supposed to be at around $733 billion by 2020. It could now go down to $700 billion. So when people are writing the budget, what's the first thing that gets cut, and how could this negatively impact the military?
Well, good morning. And one of the things that we saw, just 2 years ago, we were at a 1940 level military. And you had a case there where planes were dropping out of the sky. Our troops were underpaid and undersupplied, and even more so, our ships couldn't even sail. Now, finally, we're back to a force that is showing the world that the U.S. is a force to be reckoned with. I think cutting these resources that are so valuably needed would show the world a bad message. And in the global market that we have today, with everything going on, it sends a bad message.
Yeah, especially right now when everything's so volatile. We have a lot of, we got our fingers in a lot of pies right now, and a lot of them are very dangerous. To be cutting back is not a good time, right?
Well, no, it's not. And if you look, for the first time, we were able to have a budget that was approved and appropriated in 10 years. Now, that's with the Congress that worked together on one issue that they agreed on, that America should be strong. Now, moving forward, if we start looking at those cuts, we're going to find ourselves back in the same place they were, where we had this atrophy that made us not to be a force to be reckoned with. At the same time, when you've got China and other forces around the world trying to build their military.
Now, Defense Secretary Mattis says he's worried about China and Russia. And the National Defense Strategy Commission, which is a bipartisan group, said America might struggle to win or perhaps lose a war against China and Russia. Do you agree with that? Could that possibly happen?
Well, absolutely. And if this would have been the same United States defense that we saw 2 years ago, that would have 100% been the course. But for the first time in 17 years, the UN believes that we have peace with the Taliban. We're back on a rise, but when the rest of the world saw our military declining up to 2 years ago, they saw that as a time to take a lead or an advantage. So we're back on the rise, and I think cutting our military at this crucial point sends a bad message to the world when we're telling the United Nations and the UN that they need to increase their spending. We have to do the exact same.
Yeah. Well, Iran continues to be a pain for the United States, and they've just tested another missile, got caught doing it. They say they didn't do anything wrong. It seems clear if you read the UN agreement that they have. What do you think the response should be?
Well, the agreement 2231 clearly states that they are not supposed to be doing this type of testing and going forward with their program. It is a clear example right there when you bring it up of why we cannot cut our defense spending. And the deal we had in 2015 was a horrible deal for America. $1.7 billion went back to the Iranian government. They didn't use that for their people. What they used that for was to proliferate weapons across the globe into Yemen and Afghanistan and Syria, but also to increase their nuclear program. And, just a few months ago when the EU was saying, the U.S. was taking the wrong steps, this shows that we are taking the right steps, and sanctions and more are needed with Iran.
Yeah. Interesting. And, Mattis was quoted as saying, we all know that America can afford survival, which I'm sure resonates with a lot of folks out there this morning.
Sir, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
27 minutes after the hour, chaos erupting in Paris. Have you seen some of this? Hundreds of protesters burning cars, attacking police. What a mess. And they're vowing to continue the rioting. How the French president is responding this morning.
Wow. And trying to catch Bill and Hillary's latest speaking tour, why it could now cost less than your next lunch.
Welcome back. Rudy Giuliani slamming special counsel Bob Mueller for what he calls unethical tactics in the Russia probe. In a radio interview, the president's attorney accuses Mueller's team of intimidating witnesses.
This isn't a search for the truth. It's a witch hunt. This is what's wrong with these special prosecutors and independent counsels. They think they're God.
Well, the interview comes days after President Trump's former attorney Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to lying about a potential Trump real estate project in Russia and how long that plan went on for. France considering all options as they assess the damage from Paris's worst riots in a decade. French President Macron is considering a state of emergency and beefing up protest security. Macron is asking the prime minister for a meeting with political party leaders and the so-called yellow vest protesters to stop the violence over high taxes and a fuel tax there. There were more than 400 arrests and 133 injuries over the weekend as the Champs-Elysees and all that area around the Arc de Triomphe has been just ripped apart in these protests. Also, a special tribute from the Houston Texans honoring President George H.W. Bush.
Please stand and join in a moment of silent reflection in memory of President Bush.
Now the Texans holding a moment of silence for their hometown fan. Houston playing with heavy hearts, but they did come out and beat the Browns 29-13. So that's good news. Carly, over to you.
All right, and in just hours from now, the nation will begin their final farewells to the former president. Tributes pouring in across the country, including from one man whose job it was to protect the former vice president during a campaign event in Florida more than 30 years ago. Colonel Rob Maness, a two-time Senate candidate and founder of Opslands.com, joins us now. Colonel Maness, thank you so much for being with us this morning. I hear you have a pretty amusing story about a personal encounter you had with the former president. So can you tell us what happened?
Good morning, Carly. Well, as you said, about 30 years ago, I was on a protection detail. I was in Air Force EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal at the time, and we were assigned to the Secret Service on the detail to protect the vice president at an event in Florida. And I was in the lead car clearing his motorcade route on an interstate, and my job was to make sure the overpasses were clear, there weren't any abandoned vehicles that could be dangerous and those kinds of things. And we saw a large truck with the word dynamite on the side of the trailer on an overpass, so I had to get out of the police car I was riding in and make my way up there. But as I was making my way up to try to climb up the hill to the overpass, I stepped down on the grass and ended up in water over my head because in a suit and tie. So I promptly got out of the water, went up and cleared the vehicle, got back in the vehicle, and went ahead to the venue in front of the vice president's motorcade and hopped out of the car because part of my job was to clear the venue also. And there was a man waiting for me there. His name was George W. Bush. He looked at me. He was a much younger version of himself, as I was then too. He looked at me, he kind of grinned that grin, and he said, "What happened to you?" And I told him the story. We chuckled a little bit. He patted me on the back, and I went on my way. And eventually I did see the vice president in the venue, and he gave me a look and a grin and pointed at me, and that was it. But he was a great commander-in-chief when he did become president. I do have to say that.
Yeah, well, nothing like looking not your best when you're meeting one of the most important people in the world. So sorry about that for happening to you. Now, you say that Bush 41, the former president, is the most exceptional commander-in-chief of the military you've ever served under. Why?
That's exactly right. He's the only one that I served under that had combat experience, which I later got under his command for the first time in Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And he made the decisions the right way. He told his generals what needed to be done. They came up with the plan. Then he approved the plan. They went out and executed the plan. And then he made the strategic decisions to end the conflict when it was the appropriate time. He built an extremely exceptionally good coalition that was made up of all kinds of countries you wouldn't even think of today that fought that war in the first Gulf War. And then he made the right decisions after the war. And the man, when the wall came down and the Soviet Union fell and the Cold War ended, Commander-in-Chief Bush could have made hundreds of mistakes with the movements of forces and U.S. forces in Europe and those kinds of things, but they were all done almost in a flawless manner. You know, when I was later a commander under the commander-in-chief that was Bush 43, I had already knew that he would be a good commander-in-chief, but he just didn't have the combat experience, so you could tell that was there, but Bush 41 really just did it right.
And, you know, with that in mind, do you think that he's been given enough credit for all that he accomplished during his 4 years in office?
Oh, absolutely not. But you know what? Knowing him the way that we know him today, I think he just looked at that and said, well, you know, that it is what it is. My job was to serve, and he humbly moved on, and he continued to serve his entire life, really, and is serving us today.
And what a humble man. And you see the two former Bush presidents on the screen. One of his final conversations was with his son. They shared an I love you message. Family was always so important to him, and now he's in a better place with his wife and daughter. Thank you so much, Colonel Maness. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Carly.
Thanks.
Good stuff. All right, 36 minutes after the hour, President Trump threatening a government shutdown if his border wall isn't in the budget.
A possible shutdown if we don't get the wall money. A very possible. We're in negotiation. If we don't get border security, possible shutdown.
Can either party break the stalemate? Can they work together to get a deal? We're going to debate that coming up.
Good morning and welcome back. The Clintons' tour ticket prices are hitting an all-time low. Tickets for an evening with the Clintons are now starting as low as, $11. The cheapest ticket at the start of their tour was about $75. The political duo is trekking across the U.S. and Canada. They're talking about their time in the White House and the 2016 presidential election. Senator Kamala Harris says she will decide on her 2020 presidential run with her family over the holidays. The California Democrat has given several hints at a run, including recent campaigning for Democratic candidates in Iowa and South Carolina, and donations to Democratic parties in all 4 early nominating states. She also has a book scheduled for release in January, about a year before the Iowa caucus. Now, she is one of more than 30 Democrats reportedly considering challenging President Trump in 2020. Look at all those faces. And speaking of the election, rumored 2020 presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg is heading to Iowa tomorrow. The former New York City mayor, who recently registered as a Democrat, will be hosting a panel on climate change. Iowa is home to the first contest of the presidential primaries. Bloomberg says he'll decide whether or not to run by February. And this week, Michigan will become the first Midwest state to legalize recreational marijuana. Starting Thursday, adults 21 and over can legally possess up to 2.5 ounces of pot and grow up to 12 plants. Voters approved the measure during the midterms. It can only be used in homes or on private property. 11 states, including Washington, D.C., have legalized recreational marijuana so far. Rob.
All right, Carly, thanks so much. All right, the president may be extending the budget deadline, but he's not backing down on the border wall, even threatening a shutdown if it's not in the budget. So will Democrats meet the president halfway? Here now to debate that is former presidential campaign advisor for the McCain-Palin ticket, Ford O'Connell, and former Democratic member of the Ohio State Senate, Capri Cafaro. Guys, thanks so much for coming on this morning.
Absolutely. Good morning.
Good morning. Capri, Chuck Schumer is sounding a bit more moderate when it comes to, I guess, spending on the border and kind of going back to the way that the Democrats were maybe 10, 15 years ago when they talked about the border. What do you think?
I think that it's a good move. I mean, look, Chuck Schumer is basically saying that he is willing to work with the Republicans in a bipartisan way to bring forward a package for enhanced border security. You know, and I don't see why it shouldn't have some money for the wall. And so, you know, government shutdowns are not good. They're not good for politics. They're not good for the American people. They're not good for the government. And so I would hope that, you know, Chuck Schumer can lead by example and that the House Democrats will follow follow suit. I know that's a heavy lift. I know that that's maybe unlikely, but I think it's what's best for America.
Yeah. Ford, let's look at the gap between it on what they want. Chuck Schumer, the Democrats want to spend $1.6 billion to shore up the border, put some security to it. The president wants $5 billion for that portion, maybe a quarter of the wall or a fifth of the wall. There's a gap there. The president doesn't seem like he's going to want to drop down by a single penny. What do you think that the chances are that a deal gets done?
Well, he should actually dig in his heels. Look, if the events over the Thanksgiving weekend prove anything, when hundreds of Central American migrants tried to bum rush the southern border in California, it shows that the border is not, in fact, secure. And frankly, if Chuck Schumer and the Democrats want to shut down the government and leave millions of Americans less than secure rather than working with the Trump administration, then shame on them. Essentially, that's what it all comes down to. Democrats always talk about border security, but they never deliver. And frankly, they should just listen to two of their recent presidential candidates who tell you illegal immigration is killing Europe. Why do we have to experience that in America? Why can't we just be honest about what's going on at the border?
Yeah, Capri, you're a pretty common sense Democrat here. I mean, when you look at the numbers, we just had, I mean, you've got, I mean, these are really serious numbers, though. I mean, the opioid deaths in this country, 70,000 last year. A lot of that comes up through Mexico. And on a bad month, you'll have 50,000 people caught illegally trying to cross into the country. When you think about those numbers, the president says this is a winner for him. What do you think?
Well, I think that the American people do want our borders to be secured, and I think that the Democrats are trying to strike a balance between, providing border security and at the same time not being perceived as alienating a group of individuals because the Hispanic and Latino population is growing here in the United States. So, but this isn't just about being politically correct. It is, the federal government in particular does have an obligation. It is one of their primary, functions to defend our nation and secure our borders. And so I think that, at the end of the day, Democrats and Republicans need to come together on this, and we need to deal with comprehensive immigration reform. That's not what we're going to deal with right this minute, but it has to happen.
Capri, more than a decade ago, 80 senators came together to support the 2006 Secure Border Fence Act.
Right.
And a lot of those people were Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and even Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. They acknowledged then that the border was not secure. Today, they do not acknowledge that, and we all know that the border infrastructure
is politics.
The border infrastructure is a joke. Nothing has changed, and yet every time we talk about border security, Democrats want to talk about DACA. They want to talk about anything other than actually securing the border.
We need to secure the border.
This is a political winner for President Trump because essentially people are sick and tired of government saying they're going to do something like they did in 1986 and 2006, and they never delivered.
I think the Dems have been beholden to their far left wing. I think they're maybe starting to see the light on this issue, and they're trying to move back towards the middle. We'll see what happens. Guys, thank you so much. We got to cut it off there, but thanks for all the energy. We appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Great debate. Well, it's time now to check in with Steve Doocy to see what's coming up on Fox and Friends. Good morning.
Hey, Carly. Hey, Rob. Good Monday morning to you. Yeah, coming up on Fox and Friends, we're going to try to figure out what the president's talking about when he tweeted a couple hours ago. China's agreed to reduce and remove tariffs on cars coming into China from the U.S. Currently, the tariff is 40%. What's that about? That's a big win for him. We don't have any details yet other than that. We're going to talk about that and the caravan and the life and times of President George Herbert Walker Bush, 41, who died on Friday night. We will speak to a great lineup of guests, including Congresswoman Liz Cheney, one of the most powerful Republicans in the House of Representatives, Ken Paxton is going to be joining us, the Attorney General of Texas, Stuart Varney, and Kevin Sorbo, who's got a brand new Christmas movie. So we got a busy 3 hours. Shimkus and Schmidt that starts 12 and a half minutes from right now.
We sound like a law firm. Shimkus and
the worst law firm you ever went to.
No,
you want to lose the case? Come to us.
Schmidt and Shimkus.
We'll see you in a few minutes.
You bet.
Welcome back. Mexico's new government faced with the growing migrant crisis at their border.
Officials meeting in Washington today to find a solution, but what has to happen before a deal can be struck?
Retired Judge Stephen Bailey was the GOP nominee for California Attorney General, and he joins us now. Thank you, Judge, for coming back on this morning. The president has very efficiently made this our problem, as in us and Mexico together. What do you think? What do you think is going to happen here with AMLO's new administration?
Well, I think it's very positive that the government of Mexico and the United States are sitting down to talk about this problem. As you pointed out, this is a joint problem between the United States and Mexico. It's both of our countries' problems. It requires international bilateral settlement. And I think President Trump setting down the red line, saying that immigrants are not going to come into the United States without going through proper channels, has sent a message to Latin American governments that things have to change.
All right, so we have a potential deal here called Remain in Mexico, where asylum seekers would remain in Mexico while their claims are being processed. I understand why the United States likes that deal, but why the heck would Mexico agree to that when their border cities are a mess? And I'm sure that the last thing that they want are more people in them.
Well, you know, I think economic growth has been taking place in Mexico for some time. There are jobs available. Nobody's ever said in this current crisis that there isn't employment in Mexico. The real issue is migrants have decided, and those who have organized these caravans have been telling migrants that it's easy just to enter the United States and violate our laws and our immigration rules. It's not going to be easy any longer under the president's program. He's making it clear internationally that we have borders in this country, that we're going to defend our borders. Mexico likewise has borders and wants to defend its borders. And people coming to Mexico, if they can't enter the United States and they're going to be stuck in Mexico, may not pack up and leave Guatemala and Honduras and Nicaragua.
And I was wondering about that. You know, I mean, when you look at it, I think the Mexicans have been very happy to look the other way on this problem coming from further south in Central America. Now, if they're going to be staying in Mexico, will this make Mexico look at their southern border and think about shoring that up?
I think absolutely it will. Now, the Mexican administration has announced a program that they want the United States to agree to and cooperate with, and that is economic development in Central America. Ultimately, I think that's the answer, because if you can build up the economies in Central America, develop the rule of law, and make it safe for individuals to stay in their home country, at that point, we're not going to have this immigration mess that we've had over